Marisol Vega, Luis Vega, two siblings bound by secrets and obsession, across Houston and into the backroads of Louisiana, their lives collided with that of 6-month-old Emmanuel, a baby who vanished from his crib in the dead of night. It began with an ordinary morning in the Haro household, one that should have carried the usual sounds of a family preparing for the day. The sun rose quietly over Houston, casting soft light through the curtains of the modest home. But instead of laughter and baby chatter, there was silence. When the mother entered the nursery to check on 6-month-old Emmanuel, the crib was empty. The blanket that usually comforted him was crumpled on the floor, and the window was slightly open, swaying in the morning breeze. Panic spread instantly, a fear unlike anything she had ever known. She screamed for her husband, and within minutes, chaos had replaced the calm. Police arrived quickly, setting up a perimeter and combing the home for any trace of the child. The disappearance of baby Emmanuel was not treated as a simple case of wandering. The boy was too young to leave on his own. From the beginning, detectives suspected an abduction. By mid-morning, the street outside the Haro home was flooded with flashing lights, reporters and curious neighbors. Camera crews set up across the road, capturing every movement. The missing baby story spread rapidly across television screens, drawing in viewers and igniting fear in the community. Volunteers began arriving to join the search, handing out flyers and combing nearby parks and wooded areas. Yet despite the growing crowd and determined effort, no trace of Emmanuel appeared. Detectives questioned the parents separately, pressing for any detail that might explain what happened during the night. Both gave consistent accounts, describing how they put Emmanuel to bed, checked on him once before midnight, and then awoke to the horror of an empty crib. Their grief seemed raw and uncalculated, but investigators knew too well that appearances could mislead. The absence of any physical evidence inside the house left every possibility open. As the hours turned into the first night, the search expanded further. Helicopters hovered overhead with heat-seeking cameras, while bloodhounds were brought in to trace Emmanuel's scent. The dogs picked up a trail near the backyard fence, but lost it within a few hundred feet, as though the child had been carried into a vehicle waiting nearby. This development fueled speculation that the abduction had been planned, executed by someone who knew the layout of the house and the family's routine. The city, usually bustling with routine, now pulsed with a quiet fear. Parents clutched their children tighter, neighbors locked their doors earlier, and strangers eyed one another with suspicion. The Haro case was no longer just a family tragedy, it had become a community nightmare. Detectives began their second day on the case with grim determination, knowing that the first 48 hours were crucial in child abduction investigations. The Haro home remained sealed off, every room carefully photographed and dusted for prints, but the results were disappointing. Nothing stood out, no foreign fingerprints, no unusual shoe prints, nothing that could be directly tied to a kidnapper. Investigators walked through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, interviewing anyone who might have heard or seen something unusual during the night. Most neighbors described the evening as quiet, but one detail began to surface again and again: a white van. Several residents recalled seeing it parked near the Haro residence sometime after dark. At first, it seemed unremarkable. Delivery vans and service vehicles were common in the area, but as each person repeated the same description, suspicion grew. The police quickly began combing through records of vans in the area. They checked local businesses, rental companies, private owners. There were dozens of white vans registered within a few miles, and each had to be investigated. Officers pulled traffic camera footage from nearby intersections, hoping to catch sight of the mysterious vehicle. Hours of video were reviewed, yet nothing concrete emerged. Either the van had been deliberately kept off main roads, or it had slipped through gaps in the city's surveillance network. The frustration among the detectives was palpable. It felt as if someone had moved deliberately, carefully avoiding leaving any trace behind. Meanwhile, the Haro family faced relentless media attention. News anchors replayed images of the desperate parents pleading for their baby's return. The mother's tear-streaked face appeared on every major channel, while the father stood by her side, silent and visibly broken. Reporters speculated endlessly. Some suggested a stranger abduction. Others whispered about possible family involvement. Public pressure weighed heavily on the investigation team. Every hour without progress intensified the community's anger and fear. Back inside the command center set up in a nearby building, detectives mapped out every possible theory. One suggested the van could belong to a contractor or worker who had watched the house for days, studying the family's patterns before striking. Another wondered whether the abduction was personal, perhaps tied to a dispute or secret unknown to investigators. Still, no motive had been uncovered. There were no ransom notes, no phone calls, no demands of any kind. The silence from the abductor was chilling. In an effort to shake loose new leads, the police organized a large search of nearby wooded areas, riversides, and abandoned lots. Volunteers and officers moved in lines, combing the ground for clothing, toys, or any trace of Emmanuel. Helicopters circled overhead, while divers checked drainage ditches and creeks. Every possible lead ended the same way, empty and discouraging. Yet investigators couldn't shake the detail of the van. It had to mean something. Too many witnesses had described it for it to be coincidence. The van became the ghost of the investigation, always close yet never caught, a silent reminder that whoever had taken baby Emmanuel was still out there, one step ahead. As the days turned into weeks, the focus of the investigation began to shift. With no ransom demand, no communication from the kidnapper, and no physical evidence linking an outsider to the crime, detectives turned their gaze inward. Statistically, most infant abductions are carried out by someone close to the family. That fact alone was enough to redirect suspicion toward Emmanuel's parents. Their grief had been broadcast on every news channel, their pleas for their son's safe return replayed countless times. To the public, their tears looked genuine, but to seasoned investigators, emotions could be staged. Detectives knew they needed to dig deeper. Financial records were the first red flag. A review revealed that the Haro family was drowning in debt. Credit card bills were overdue, utilities had been cut off in the past, and the father's small business was failing. More concerning, records showed cash withdrawals in unusual amounts, just days before the baby vanished. The family's situation painted a troubling picture: desperation, stress, and motive. Was it possible that the parents had staged the abduction to cover something darker? Rumors spread quickly. Local tabloids speculated about the father's late-night trips to casinos and whispered that gambling debts might have caught up with him. Talk show hosts debated whether the family was hiding something. Social media erupted with theories, and strangers online dissected every interview, pointing out supposed inconsistencies in the parents' statements. The narrative of a grieving family was now clouded by suspicion. Detectives knew the damage was done. The Haros were under a microscope. Whether guilty or not, both parents were called in for polygraph tests. The sessions were grueling, conducted separately, with each question designed to expose deceit. To the surprise of many on the investigative team, their responses showed no deception when asked if they had harmed Emmanuel or arranged his disappearance. Still, polygraphs were not considered foolproof. Some detectives remained convinced that something was off. Adding to the tension, the parents opened their home to national news crews, pleading once more for their baby's safe return. The mother's trembling voice, the father's silent tears, and the empty crib displayed on camera stirred sympathy across the country. For a brief moment, the tide of public opinion softened, but doubts continued to linger. Even among investigators, the debate was heated. Were these parents truly victims of a nightmare, or were they orchestrating it? Behind the scenes, law enforcement continued to check every angle. Phone records were analyzed, bank accounts scrutinized, and personal acquaintances interviewed. Friends and relatives described the couple as loving but stressed, struggling financially, yet deeply devoted to their son. None could imagine them harming Emmanuel. Despite weeks of digging, nothing concrete tied the Haros to foul play. The case sat in a strange limbo, suspicion high. evidence thin. By the end of the third week, investigators faced a brutal truth. The parents might not be involved at all. If that was the case, every hour spent scrutinizing them was time lost. While somewhere beyond the neighborhood, baby Emmanuel could still be out there, waiting to be found. The case had grown cold when an unexpected call jolted the investigation back to life. A worker at a truck stop just outside the city reported finding something unusual near a dumpster. The sock was rushed to a forensic lab. Fibers and DNA testing confirmed what investigators feared and hoped for. At the same time, it belonged to baby Emmanuel. Suddenly, the case was no longer stagnant. The discovery shifted the search radius and breathed urgency back into the investigation. Surveillance cameras at the truck stop were pulled for review. Hours of grainy footage revealed countless travelers passing through, but one image caught attention. A woman, dressed in a dark hoodie, approached the dumpster carrying a small bag. Her face was obscured by the hood, and she moved quickly, almost furtively, before tossing the bag and walking away. The footage was frustratingly blurry, but a sharp-eyed detective noticed something striking. The woman wore a bracelet that glimmered in the camera's light. It appeared silver, dangling with several small charms, shaped like hearts. The detail was subtle but significant. It was the kind of personal accessory that could identify her, a thread investigators could finally tug. Detectives canvassed the truck stop, interviewing clerks, gas station attendants, and regular customers. Some vaguely remembered the woman, describing her as petite, with dark hair peeking from under her hood. None could provide a name. Meanwhile, the discovery raised haunting questions. Why had the sock been discarded? Was it a deliberate clue left to taunt investigators, or simply a mistake from someone desperate to dispose of evidence? If the woman in the footage was connected to the abduction, she had been reckless enough to linger in public, but cautious enough to hide her face. The Haro family was informed about the discovery. The news delivered a complex blow. Relief surged at the confirmation that their son had been alive after the abduction, but terror followed in the knowledge that he was still missing and possibly in danger. Cameras once again filled their front yard, as reporters shouted questions about the sock, the woman, and whether Emmanuel was closer to being found. For detectives, this chapter marked a shift in tone. No longer was the case defined only by absence and unanswered questions. Now there was something concrete to follow. The woman with the bracelet had entered their investigation like a ghost captured on tape. Somewhere behind her hooded face and dangling silver charms, the truth about baby Emmanuel's disappearance was waiting to be uncovered. The silver bracelet became the thread investigators could not ignore. Detectives sifted through records of individuals with prior connections, infants and child care in the Houston area. After weeks of slow progress, the break came when a daycare employee recalled a former coworker who always wore a bracelet with tiny heart-shaped charms. Her name was Marisol Vega, a 34-year-old woman who had once worked at a nearby daycare center before being quietly let go. Reports in her file hinted at troubling behavior, episodes of neglect, unexplained absences, and complaints from parents who claimed she had handled children roughly. She had avoided charges back then, but the memory of her reputation lingered in the child care community. Detectives moved quickly, pulling her employment history and recent movements. Marisol lived only a few miles from the Haro home, in a cramped apartment filled with second-hand furniture and drawn curtains that rarely opened. Surveillance was placed on her immediately. Officers noted her solitary lifestyle, her odd hours, and a tendency to shop late at night when the stores were nearly empty. None of her behavior was overtly criminal, but her presence matched the blurry outline from the truck stop footage almost too well. A warrant was granted, and her home was searched. What investigators found inside was unsettling. The small apartment contained no crib or evidence of a child, but it was packed with infant-related items. A stroller leaned against the wall, unopened packages of diapers were stacked in the corner, and shelves held formula, bottles, and tiny clothes neatly folded. All of it appeared unused, as though it had been placed there deliberately rather than lived with. It felt staged, a performance of normalcy, too clean and too perfect. The items could have been planted to misdirect or to create an illusion of innocence. Detectives photographed everything and bagged items for evidence. The most troubling find was a box under her bed containing old newspaper clippings and missing children flyers, none of which directly connected to Emmanuel but all centered on cases of infants or toddlers gone missing. When brought in for questioning, Marisol denied any involvement. She claimed she had never been near the truck stop where the sock was found, and insisted the bracelet was a common accessory owned by many. Her composure was steady, even rehearsed, as though she had anticipated every question. Without solid proof tying her directly to the abduction, detectives were left with circumstantial evidence and suspicion. The investigation team split over how to proceed. Some believed she was their primary suspect, the woman behind the hood, while others argued it was all too convenient. If Marisol truly was involved, why leave evidence so close to the surface? Was she clever enough to mislead them, or was she being framed by someone else entirely? The tension within the team grew, but one fact was undeniable. Marisol Vega had now moved from a name on a list to the center of the case. Just as detectives prepared to tighten their net around Marisol Vega, a chilling new lead surfaced that shifted the course of the case entirely. A security guard at a storage facility on the outskirts of town contacted police with a disturbing report. Investigators rushed to the facility, securing a warrant to search the unit the guard identified. The scene inside was both haunting and confusing. The small space was nearly empty, its concrete floor coated in dust, but several items had been placed deliberately. A folded stroller sat in one corner, as though waiting for someone to use it. Nearby, a pile of empty formula cans was stacked neatly, and taped to the wall at eye level was a photograph of Baby Emmanuel, printed from one of the widely circulated missing person posters. It was creased, worn at the edges, and unnervingly out of place. The revelation spread quickly across the team, shaking everyone involved. If Emmanuel had been there, it meant he was still alive at least at the time the unit was used. But why leave behind such chilling symbols? Detectives revisited Marisol's alibi. She had ties to the area, and her name appeared in old rental records connected to another storage facility across town, though she no longer maintained a unit there. This connection only deepened suspicion, yet once again, nothing directly linked her to the new discovery. For the Haro family, news of the storage unit sent their emotions spiraling. The idea that their baby had been kept in such a cold, desolate place was horrifying, but the presence of the handprints gave them fragile hope that he was still out there. Detectives returned to the growing pile of evidence, desperate to connect the dots. The storage unit had revealed Emmanuel was alive at some point, but it had also introduced the terrifying possibility that more than one person was involved. As investigators cross-checked old leads, a new pattern emerged. Phone records taken from Marisol Vega showed repeated late-night calls to an unlisted number in the weeks leading up to Emmanuel's disappearance. When traced, the number belonged to her older brother, Luis Vega, a 40-year-old truck driver with a long history of drifting across southern states on hauling routes. Luis had no criminal record, but his lifestyle of constant travel and low visibility made him nearly impossible to track. The breakthrough came when cell tower data was overlaid with the Haro family's location on the night Emmanuel vanished. Luis's phone had pinged near their neighborhood within a few hours of the suspected abduction. Investigators dug deeper and found more connections. Luis drove for a small trucking company, whose vehicles matched the description of the white van neighbors had reported. The ghost van that had haunted the case now had a likely owner. Detectives began building a profile. Luis was described by acquaintances as quiet and withdrawn, but with a controlling streak when it came to his younger sister. Family friends hinted he often acted like a protector, someone who felt he needed to clean up Marisol's mistakes. Investigators theorized that Marisol might have been the planner, obsessed with infants and desperate to recreate the feeling of motherhood, while Luis had the resources to move quickly and keep Emmanuel hidden. His job gave him access to remote stops, warehouses and farmland across state lines, perfect places to vanish without notice. The Haro family learned of this new suspect only through hushed whispers from reporters chasing the story. Their hope grew sharper, but so did their fear. If a professional truck driver had their son, Emmanuel could be anywhere, crossing state lines faster than authorities could respond. The idea that the baby was being carried from place to place in the back of a truck haunted the public, feeding a frenzy of speculation. The search for Luis Vega stretched into its 4th month, a pursuit that spanned highways, truck stops, and small towns scattered across the South. A task force moved in quietly, setting up surveillance around the farm Luis was believed to be using. For 2 days they watched. During the day, the property appeared abandoned, but at night faint light glowed from inside a weathered barn. Detectives grew tense when they noticed Luis slipping in and out, always carrying bags or containers, always alone. The breakthrough came on the 3rd night when officers spotted him cradling something small and wrapped in a blanket as he entered the barn. The detail ignited urgency. If it was Emmanuel, this was the closest they had been since the abduction. The raid was launched before dawn. Officers stormed the property, moving swiftly through the creaking doors of the barn. Inside, the sight stopped them cold. In the far corner, nestled in a makeshift crib fashioned from hay bales and wooden slats, lay baby Emmanuel. He was alive, wrapped in the same faded blue blanket that had been left behind on the floor of his nursery months earlier. The child stirred and began to cry, his voice filling the barn and confirming the impossible. He had survived. Relief surged through the team as paramedics rushed forward to examine him. Aside from being underweight and dehydrated, Emmanuel was miraculously unharmed. Luis Vega was tackled and restrained, his expression unreadable as he was led out in handcuffs. Within hours, his sister Marisol was arrested in Houston, charged with conspiracy and kidnapping. Investigators pieced together the motive. The siblings had been part of a scheme linked to an underground adoption network. Marisol, unable to have children and obsessed with the idea of raising one, had targeted Emmanuel. Luis had provided the logistics, moving the baby across state lines and hiding him in secluded spots whenever police pressure grew. The storage unit, the sock at the truck stop, even the staged baby supplies in Marisol's apartment were calculated moves to confuse and mislead investigators. The Haro family's reunion with Emmanuel was captured on camera, their tears of joy broadcast across the country. Story that had begun in silence and despair ended in relief, though scars remained. The community that had lived in fear for months finally exhaled. For detectives, the case stood as proof that persistence, even in the face of carefully staged deception, could bring resolution. Baby Emmanuel's survival became more than just a rescue. It was a symbol of hope in a case designed to break it. And as the cameras rolled, the nation watched justice catch up with the people who thought they could erase a child's existence.